Hello and welcome to The Diverse Bookshelf with me, Samia Aziz. On this show, I interview incredible authors doing a deep dive into important themes and issues while talking all things books. Today's guest is an author whose work I have been reading for a few years and who I absolutely adore. Leila Aboulela has written numerous books that are all beautifully written, poetic, and deeply moving and inspirational. I'm so pleased she's my guest today. Leila Aboulela is the first ever winner of the Caine Prize for African Writing. Nominated 3 times for the Orange Prize, which is now the Women's Prize for Fiction, she's the author of numerous novels including Bird Summons, The Kindness of Enemies, The Translator, which is a New York Times notable book of the year, Minaret and Lyrics Alley, which was the fiction winner of the Scottish Book Awards. Her collection of short stories, Elsewhere Home, won the Saltire Fiction Book of the Year. Leila's work has been translated into 15 languages, and her plays, The Insider, The Mystic Life, and others were broadcast on BBC Radio. She grew up in Khartoum, Sudan, and now lives in Aberdeen, Scotland. Her latest novel, River Spirit, is out in March 2023. In River Spirit, Leila gives us the unforgettable story of a people who, against the odds and for a brief time, gained independence from foreign rule through their willpower, wit, and sacrifice. Thank you so much, Leila, for joining me today on the Diverse Bookshelf. It's such an honour to have you.
Thank you, Samia. Yeah, I'm happy to be with you and chat with you today.
And obviously you have a really wonderful book coming out in March called A River Spirit, but you have also written so many other wonderful books. So I'm really, really excited to talk about all the kind of things that you've been working on and to understand your writing journey and you a little bit better. So actually, to begin with, I want to hear a little bit about how you became a writer and what your journey has been like.
Okay, so I loved reading, when I was growing up in Sudan. I read a lot of fiction. I read in English mostly, and but it was just a hobby. I never really thought, that it would be something I would do in the future. And I studied statistics actually because I was good in math. So I did statistics in university. And then I came to the UK and I went to the London School of Economics and I started a postgraduate degree in statistics. And I was also married by then and I had a child. And then we moved to Aberdeen and I had another child. So anyway, to cut a long story short, my statistics PhD didn't work out. And so I found myself stuck at home in Aberdeen with the 2 young children. And I was very lost and I was homesick for Sudan and I was miserable. And so I used to go to the library a lot and read books. And that's when I started to want to write, to kind of like have an outlet for my feelings. So I started writing little by little, and then I joined a writing workshop, and everybody was very nice and very encouraging, and so I kept going.
Oh, so do you think writing has helped you kind of process some of your experiences and your feelings? So have you found it to be quite like therapeutic and cathartic? And did you ever think that you would go from kind of writing maybe for yourself or like exploring it to becoming an author with many published books?
Well, no, I think from the beginning it was something when I went to the writing group, and then in those days we used to read our work out loud. There was no email, there was no sending your work out to people. You just showed up with a printed sheet basically. So I just loved the response. I loved how everybody was so nice to me. And and at the same time I'd take my children to the school in the morning and nobody would be nice to me. And it was very lonely and frustrating. And so I thought, this is a good way to make friends. This is a good way to enter kind of life in the UK. This is a good route in. So I was ambitious from the beginning. I did want to publish. So I just kept going, and I kept kind of persevering, and writing and editing and learning, and I kept going. I wouldn't say it was therapeutic in the sense that, yeah, it was an outlet for my emotion, but from the beginning I was aware that it needed to be shaped. This was art that needed to be shaped for a story. I was aware of a reader, that this was going to be read by someone else. It wasn't something that I'm just writing, putting away.
That's really interesting. And I mean, I can imagine that it was like an insane amount of work over the years, because also you've been writing for decades now. And so and I kind of see your books. Every book is quite different, and you can kind of see you as a writer continually changing, which is so nice to see. So I can only imagine that there must be an insane amount of work that goes into it. But I want to just talk about your upcoming book, River Spirit. So for anyone listening that may not have yet heard of it or picked it up yet, please introduce River Spirit. Tell us what it's about.
Well, it's a historical novel that's set in 19th century Sudan, in the lead up to the British invasion of Sudan, and it shows a time when Sudan was ruled by the Ottoman. It was part of the Ottoman Empire, and then the people of Sudan rebelled against that because they felt that they were being mistreated, and they followed a charismatic leader who said that he was the expected Mahdi, who was in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that there will be a Mahdi coming at the end of time, and this man said, "I am that person," and so people followed him. And then, so that's the kind of the historical background. But in terms of the characters, it's about a girl and her brother who are saved by a merchant. Their village is destroyed and their father is killed, and so they're saved by this young merchant from Khartoum who takes him into his care. And then the girl kind of develops a crush towards him, and that's this love story works its way out throughout the wars that take place.
So what really inspired you to focus on this particular part in history and to tell these stories that you've chosen to tell? I mean, from my perspective, I hadn't read a book set in the late 19th century and 1890s, especially in Sudan. There was so much I didn't know. I didn't even know that there was somebody that was claiming to be the Mahdi, which is kind of the Messiah. It's a prediction in the Quran that he will come and it will be the end of towards the end of the world and all this kind of. I didn't even know that. So for me, I was like, whoa, that's so fascinating. But what inspired you to tell that story?
Well, it's the Mahdi is not in mentioned in the Quran. He's mentioned in many of the authentic hadiths, though. So he's accepted as that there will be a Mahdi coming along, but he has certain characteristics. So one of the things that happened in the book is that the scholars of Sudan, they test him. They give him the benefit of the doubt, and they kind of check to see whether he is really. He comes with these characteristics that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ spoke about, and they conclude that he isn't. They conclude that he's not the expected Mahdi, and they say that to him. They say that, stop saying that you are, stop causing trouble, etc. But he doesn't. He continues, and so they take a position against him. There's and so that is also part of the story. And I decided, as I was reading the research, that I really felt that these scholars took a brave stand, and it was really courageous to stick to this point of view, because so many people didn't. So many people eventually followed the Mahdi just because he was winning. So everybody wants to be on the winning side. But to stick to your belief and to say, no, this is not the right, it's hard. And I found that, very inspiring. But back to your question of why I wanted to write about that, I guess I was looking for connections between Sudan and Scotland. And Gordon, who's the British governor general, who comes in to try to smash the Mahdi, but he doesn't. He gets killed instead. He was Scottish, and so I was looking for aspects of history where I could bring the two countries together. But people, because you're young, you wouldn't have known about this story. But Gordon was such a hero. He was considered a Victorian hero, and up until the 60s, there was a major Hollywood film made about him, where Charlton Heston played the Mahdi, and Charlton Heston played Gordon, and Laurence Olivier in blackface played the Mahdi. So this was known, for an older generation of British people. Yeah.
Wow. And so throughout the book, obviously you tell a story of slavery, and so my kind of the most history that most of us are aware of when it comes to slavery is kind of like in America, and it's Black history, and it's a certain time, and it's like transatlantic. But I had never really read very much about slavery elsewhere. Like I'd read one novel that talked about something similar in like Iran, but not much at all. And obviously you tell us about slavery in 19th century Sudan. Can you tell us a little bit about what you found out in your research, and sort of what you present in the book as well?
Yeah, so when I started the research, I went to Durham University, which holds the Sudan archives, and I found this bill of sale for a girl, called Zamzam. And it was just, I knew that slavery existed in Sudan, but just seeing the bill of sale and the names of the people involved, and the amount that was paid and all that, was kind of like, wow. And so I wanted to write about her, and it was about writing about her. And then I found another details of a petition that was raised about a slave girl who had escaped, and she's gone back to her former master. So I was kind of like curious, well, if she's escaped, why did she go back to the previous family? And I was interested. But the slavery existed in Africa before the transatlantic slavery, and it took the form of prisoners of war who are captured in the village fights and things like that. Then people would capture prisoners of war, and then they would be held as slaves until their families paid for them. So there was a system of slavery. Difference between the slavery practiced inside Africa and the transatlantic slavery was that, of course, within Africa there wasn't the element of racism, because everybody was the same race. Also, it wasn't so capitalist driven. It wasn't about labor. It wasn't about property. It was more about a vulnerable person, taking advantage of people who were orphans, who were, kidnapped, who were in this kind of situation. And the East Coast slavery, the Ottomans and the Egyptians, they enslaved little boys for the armies. So they would enslave these young boys and bring them up as soldiers for their armies. And the girls, they would bring them up as domestic workers to work in the home. So that is why it is different. And because all of these places in the East Coast were governed by Islamic Sharia, the Islamic law applied to the slaves and to the ownership of the slaves. So, for example, it was considered a good thing for people to give freedom to their slaves. If a woman had children from the master, they were born free. There wasn't like in the transatlantic slavery where the children are also slaves. No, they were legitimate. They were free. They were legitimate, and they had the same rights as all the other children. They would inherit. They would live, and she herself would gain freedom. So there were lots of differences. And actually now in Sudan and in many of these other countries, Egypt, these places, many families would know someone who came from had slave ancestry. Quite a common thing.
Wow, that's really interesting. And actually, yeah, obviously, like in the book as well, like although it is slavery, we see how different it is, like how kind of it feels a little bit more like taking advantage of a domestic worker than it does slavery, in the same sense. The sense of ownership is not there, as you rightly said, and the kind of the power is very, very different. Like,
Mm.
and obviously some of your characters, they express and they embody this sense of responsibility as well, which was really nice to read and really interesting actually as well, because it's just very different
Mm.
to so much of what we see. So this book, River Spirit, and some of your other writing as well, is so rich in history, but it's also really vivid, very creative. Like, you give us really fully fledged characters that experience an array of emotion that develop from, insanely, from like the start of the book to the end. We find ourselves really rooting for certain characters and really despising others, and really wanting to see what happens. So for you as a writer, like, how do you get that balance between having something that is true to, historical accuracies, but that you still have creative license and you still kind of get that, how do you get that balance?
Well, I didn't get it at the beginning. I mean, the first draft that I wrote had too much history in it.
Hmm.
And so my editor asked me to take it out. And so this book especially, I took a lot out that was there in the first draft. And it was just a lot of research, a lot of, you do the research and then you kind of like want to show it because you know it, so it's there. But then afterwards, when you read it, you realize that that's really not what's keeping the story going, and that you need to focus on the characters and rather than give details about all these other things. So the copy editing and the copy took a long time. It was quite a lot of hard work, getting rid of all these extras and sticking to the characters, and also saying, well, would people really talk like that? I mean, if you and I now are talking about the war in Ukraine, let's say, which is currently what's happening, would we really start to talk about, this, give really particular details, or will we just speak generally? And that kind of thing is what I had to watch out for. But that is really a tricky thing about the historical fiction. You have to really be very careful. I mean, the good thing is that the story is there for you already to some extent. You're not really making up. In this case, the history was so fascinating that I really didn't have to make it up. It was just exciting as it is. So that's the plus side of the historical fiction. And then the downside is that you really have to be stepping on the brakes all the time so as not to overwhelm the reader with historical detail that is not particularly relevant to the story.
That's really really interesting. And so how did you find, amid all of that, developing characters? Because you kind of said, like, you don't really need to come up with like maybe like the plot or the arc, but then obviously you do have plots. You've got like a love story that develops and other things that happen. But yeah, what is it like developing characters within that sort of framework? And for you, because obviously, like you mentioned, that you did find in your research, you found out about Zamzam, and obviously she's the main character in the book, but you still have written other characters. What was that like within that framework?
Well, it's difficult to really analyze where imagination comes from. I mean, it's sometimes mixed with what you read, part of your life. Sometimes afterwards, I would sit and think, oh, where did this character come from? Who was she, in real life? But most of the time I don't. Most of the time I just keep writing, because what's the point? But for example, the character of Salha, who comes at the end, sort of at the endish of the book, and she's very she's very confident, she's very articulate, she's educated, she's an educated woman. So she was inspired by actually my dad's doctor. So my dad my dad had dementia in his last years of life, and he had a very nice doctor who had she's Sudanese, and she had just come back from the UK. She's just moved back to Sudan from the UK, and I really liked her, and I felt that my dad liked her, and she had a very nice voice and a way of talking. And so when I was writing Salha's section, I was hearing her voice in my ear, and sort of wanting to make Salha speak in the same way as my father's doctor did. So these things could have happened, when you I meet a lot of people. I've met a lot of people in my life who I've felt a lot of affection for, but I was never able to show it somehow. They move on or something like that. For example, like you, my dad's doctor. I mean, our paths really don't cross. But the fact that she left a kind of an impression on me then comes out through the fictional characters.
That's so, yeah, I mean, that's so great. The fact that like so much of your characters are inspired by people, and that you kind of, that you're able to bring that in. I find that's just really, really nice to hear. I understand that like a lot of, obviously the history that you write about within River Spirit is history that, because you grew up in Sudan, that you would have known anyway. But you also did a lot of research. Was there anything that you found particularly challenging or something that shocked you throughout that process?
Well, just the slavery aspect that I wrote about. Also, how poor people were, the extent of the poverty, the extent of the hardship. It's always very, very shocking, because Sudan is a difficult country in terms of the weather and in terms of the terrain, and especially for people who live far away from the Nile, and they depend on the rainfall. It can be very harsh, and people survive on very little. So that was of course very, very shocking.
And so, you do in River Spirit and in your other works as well, most of your characters, or a lot of your characters, are Muslim, or you have a reference to either something from scripture or something pertaining to faith. What really for you is the role of faith in your writing, and how does it influence what you write and how you write and the approach that you take?
Well, I think that it's a big part of what I write. I mean, it interests me. I find it fascinating. I think writers should write about what fascinates them, and I find Muslims and Muslim history fascinating, and so that comes through with the writing. I was also brought up to see the world with Muslim eyes, I suppose, if you could put it that way. So I do see the situations like from a Muslim perspective, and I'm surprised that the other Muslims don't, or I think because of the part of the drawback of colonialism and Western education is that it makes Muslims shy about expressing their opinions from a Muslim perspective. So they are trained and they learn that they must respond from a secular point of view, that speaking the language of faith is not really acceptable in this modern age, and so that people don't do that anymore. But I want to do that in my writing, so I think that fiction gives me the space to do that, and so there is always a reflection, the way the characters behave, or how they relate to each other, or what happens, that is refracted through this kind of Muslim vision.
Again, I have loved everything that you've said so far in this in this interview. And I mean, I definitely agree with you. I think that Islamic history and philosophy and theology, I also find it really, really fascinating. And I think there are so many different ways to talk about religion and Muslims, and to have that kind of nuanced approach and to be able to go really deep into it, I think is really brilliant. One of the other reasons why I really loved River Spirit is because it centered women. It centered so many women. Typically, when it comes to history, and especially, I feel like the further back we go, so much of history is taught to us through the lenses of men, centering men and having men as the ones that are victorious and the ones that are making the biggest sacrifices. But actually, like, it's the women of your novel that carry it through, that are the ones that are doing huge things, that are having these massive life experiences and things happen to them. Yeah, why? Well, not really why, but like, I just wanted you to reflect on that a little bit, on like how, I mean, women are at the center of your novel, but generally, like, this is kind of like a historical account from a female perspective, or that centers women.
Yeah, for sure. I never came across, in all my research, I never came across a first person account written by a woman in this area, in this particular area of research. It was all men. And of course, all the big figures are men. So if you just want to tell the story of what happened, this and this happened, it will all be about men. So I had to kind of like dig for and find like women in the footnotes, and then kind of use them. So every time there's a mention of a woman, okay, I grab onto that, and then I can, use my imagination. So it was little things that were said here and there. The prologue, which opens with this character called Rabha, she's a real person, but she's also a footnote. There's always a footnote, and every time when the historians come to relate this part of history, they'll say, the governor, set out to destroy the rebels, but a woman named Rabha warned them, and she ran through them. She overheard a conversation between the officer and the elder of the village, and so she ran and to warn them. And then that's it. That's all that you'd get, for example. And that her name is Rabha, that she's from the Kinana tribe, and that she ran through the night to warn them. So I thought, okay, I'll do something with that, and make it into a whole chapter. So it's almost like a creative exercise, that you're given small details, and then you have to kind of build up a whole a character and a picture. So it's actually good from it's from a creative side. That the work comes in, that you have to then be creative. So I enjoyed that. And one of the details, for example, was that there was the Islamic date was given when this particular incident took place, when she's running through the night. And because it's the 15th of the month, it was the middle of the Islamic month, I figured that the moon would be full. And so I used that, and I describe how she's running in bright moonlight because the moon is full. So it's about being, using every little clue that you can get in order to build up a bigger picture. Yeah.
And you know what? I absolutely love it, because it is actually like a reclaiming of power. Because in that example, so in the prologue of the book, had she not gone, they would never have known, or they wouldn't have known at that time, and it could have changed essentially the course of history, right?
Yes.
But in your research, you found it just to be like a footnote, like an aside. So I feel like it is such a great way to like recenter and reclaim power and say, actually, because of this woman, this is what happened. I absolutely love it. And honestly, and I really felt that, especially the prologue. I felt like, oh my goodness, what I firstly read it and I was like, what is happening? Like, what is going to happen in this book? Like, this is so intense and so crazy. And this woman, like, obviously she took such a huge risk, but you see that she's just this like strong, and I had this idea that she was like a very warrior like, and I could just imagine her like running through, I think she went through like wood or forest or whatever. It was like really thick, dense. It just honestly like really, really brilliant. I know that a lot of your writing is kind of centered on migration and identity and mixed identity and kind of like finding home. I wondered if you could reflect a little bit on that, because I have loved this so much about so much of your work, because I think as so many of us that are second generation immigrants, or we have mixed identities, it can feel really hard to articulate your own experiences and to find people and situations that kind of respect and can honor that. So I just wanted to ask you a little bit about that and how your own experiences of migration, because obviously you moved from Sudan to Scotland, and how that has impacted your writing.
Well, it definitely did. I mean, was the reason that I was writing, was to work out all the things that you were talking about. And the question is then, how can we survive in this new situation? How can Muslims, especially coming in, and some of the things that we go through, everybody, others groups go through too. It's not specifically Muslims, like everybody, anybody of color who comes into as an immigrant to a new country, and so we share some of these challenges, but there's also specific things to do with being Muslim. And so I was kind of working my way through that, and over the years, of course, there were different scenarios. I mean, I remember people being very anxious, and Muslims being very anxious and saying, "Oh, we need to go back. Our children are all going to go astray. We need to go back to our own homes, or we need to move to a Muslim country." And a lot of people still do that. And a lot of Muslims are now going to, Doha and Dubai, and they feel comfortable there because it's more of an Islamic environment. And then there were other people who were very wanting to assimilate, and they didn't put up any fight or any resistance, and so they were, completely assimilated. And then there were others who were, working hard, and there's a lot of hard work that went into, setting up mosques, having cemeteries, all these things, the structures of our life that we take for granted. How do we get married? How do we buy halal food? How do we, all these things? A lot of people have worked so hard to make it possible for us to be able to thrive in Britain, and I think it's a huge success story. And I think part of the issue of that we are shy or not speaking out is that we're not allowed to say that this is a success story. This is a huge success. We've done it. We've managed to settle here. We've managed to make Britain a country that's hospitable to Muslims. So we still have to kind of like be humble and be grateful, and not not be cocky and all that, because we know we get into trouble if we are like that. So this is all part of the survival, of course, that you have to moderate your behavior in certain ways in order to survive. But it is a success story. I mean, a lot of the anxieties, I remember people saying, "Oh, Muslims are going to pray Jummah on a Sunday because Jummah is a working day." And this was said in the 70s. "Oh, Muslims are going to stop fasting because you really can't fast, and in these countries because it's, you're working hard." And we got over all of that. And so it's really nice to see that things have gone on. Of course, also I see other aspects that are not so good. It's not all such a rosy picture. And of course, there's a lot of loss. We're less. You see the difference when you meet Muslims from sort of back home, and how they're so hospitable and so warm. And we've lost a lot of these social customs. We've become a lot more Western in our ways. We are more like individualistic. We're not really so as family oriented or as community oriented. So there's this and there's that, and it's interesting. It's an exciting journey to witness.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think migration experiences have changed so much over time, but it's not just the person that migrates that is impacted. It's then their friends and their family and future generations. I find it really fascinating. I find it a really fascinating thing to think about and to explore and to read about. Like, I think about my own life and how the migration experiences of my parents and of my maternal grandparents also migrated. But I also think about those that didn't, and the impact that that had, both on kind of like then differences in thinking and understanding and practice and culture, but also on then what it feels like to have your life split essentially between two places. Like, I just think there's so much to explore, and like throughout various books you do so much. And especially I think in Elsewhere Home, which is a collection of short stories which I loved, you talk a lot about this idea of home. Now, I know you lived in Sudan and you moved to Scotland, but you also then lived away. I think you lived in various places. I was reading a website. I was like, whoa, that's a lot. What are your reflections on this idea of home and of homesickness?
Well, I lived in the 200, what do they call, the noughties. We left Scotland and we went to Indonesia and Dubai and Doha, and then we came back in 2012, and we've been back now in Aberdeen since 2012. And I really enjoyed this opportunity to live in the Muslim world, and kind of see different Muslim countries. But I missed the UK. I have to admit, I'm very attached to it, and I do miss it. And when especially if I go to Europe or to North America, I very much want to come back to Scotland and to Britain. And landing in Heathrow is just like, whoa, I'm ecstatic, and I'm like, I'm so happy to see boots and things like that. So, so I do feel that there's different ways of looking at home. There's different, even your family could be home. I think we shouldn't really be so greedy, and we should, whatever we have, we should cherish it and enjoy it as a home. It doesn't need to be. I remember my children taught me this, and I remember saying to them, I feel so sad for you because you're not living in a country where everybody is a Muslim. And they said to me, but why? It doesn't matter, Mama. It doesn't matter so much. We're fine. We're fasting. So they are right. Why should I be so all the time saying? But I wanted them to see it. I mean, they did go abroad and they did see what it's like, and they loved it, of course. But to them, Britain is home, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, I think my idea of home has changed a lot over the years, and kind of, I lived in Pakistan for 2 years after I got married, and that really kind of changed my idea. I mean, I miss the UK terribly. I missed it so much, but I think the biggest regret I have actually is that I don't think I almost didn't allow myself to enjoy the time over there enough, or maybe I was like wrought with anxiety, and I feel like I didn't enjoy the moment enough. And I don't know if that's like I held myself back or my circumstances don't allow for that. But looking back at it, I think, wow, that was a great thing that I experienced. I had so many experiences over there that I don't have here. So many things that I took for granted over there that I don't have here. I mean, and vice versa for sure.
Did you know you were coming back, or did you know it was a temporary thing, or you weren't sure?
I did, yeah. So I didn't know for how long I was going to be there. I knew that eventually I was going to come back, but I didn't know. Yeah, I didn't know how long. Initially, I thought it might have just been for a year, and then it ended up being for 2 years, and it could have been for longer, but.
Yeah, I think sometimes the uncertainty makes things difficult. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, like I think the thing I feel now is that home is where we feel most safe and where we feel most comfortable, and where we can be kind of the best versions of ourselves. And I think that's that's why perhaps I didn't feel fully at home when I was living in Pakistan, because there were things I didn't have access to that I felt personally that I needed. And obviously everyone is different, and there are many people that do feel at home in different parts of the world that I just think maybe I wouldn't. But yeah, like definitely I also find that really fascinating. And in Elsewhere Home, you give us so many different stories. And on that, actually, so that is a collection of short stories, and I feel like I love reading short stories, but they can be hit and miss. And I always find in any short story collection that there are some I absolutely love and some I just don't vibe with, and some I feel like you've given me half a story or you've given me a shell of a story. What's going on? But for you as a writer, like what is your preferred writing form? Do you find writing short stories easier or more challenging than writing novels? What's it like for you?
Well, when I first started out, I didn't want to write a novel. I couldn't commit to such a big project. So I wanted to write a short stories, because you get a quick response. You finish it, you give it to somebody, and then bam, you're hearing from them. So that's one of the attractions of the short story, that you're quickly getting a response rather than entering. The novel is a huge commitment, so I hesitate a lot. I dither and dally before I start a novel, because it's going to take me years, and so whereas a short story I could go into it quite easily. So it gives you a chance as a writer to do things you wouldn't normally do, and you can experiment with this and with that.
And do you have out of everything that you've written so far, do you have like a favorite? Do you have a favorite child?
I have a favorite child. Has to be the latest one. Well, of course, it is. The latest one is the one that I'm thinking of most of the time now, because I'm, wondering what are people going to say about it. What are they going to think? And so I'm kind of, I've got it on my top list. But I think Lyrics Alley is probably maybe my favorite of all my novels. I think either Lyrics Alley and the Translator, but with time. The Translator was the first one, so it was special because it was the first one. But I think Lyrics Alley is probably the one that's closest to me.
So with River Spirit, did you have any kind of hesitations or concerns early on when you were kind of putting the idea together? Yeah, did you have any concerns?
Oh yeah, lots. Every time I start a novel, I have lots of concerns about it. Yeah, because once you start, it's a commitment, and then so you have to be kind of you get the structure right, and then get everything on top of it. I wasn't sure I could pull it off, so that's also something that keeps you like, oh, am I going to really go through this? So certain things sort of worried me. I'm not sure how people are going to respond to the different perspectives. Like there's so many different perspectives, and I'm not sure whether everybody will like that. That there's, because some people are from different sides of the conflict, so it's a challenge then for the reader, because you're like sitting in a different, looking at the situation from a different side of the room, and so I don't know, it might be uncomfortable for the reader. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the problem is like your readers are not universal, right? Like everyone is going to come to it from different perspective. Like I personally, I love multi-perspective novels.
Good.
I love
Okay.
that, but I also know that some people don't love it. They find it really confusing. They find it also like that it's a bit distracting, and they get a bit confused. But I always find it so fascinating because it gives you such incredible insight to what's going on. So I love the fact that we had, I don't know, how many did we have? 9 or something, different perspectives. I absolutely loved it. What was your favorite part, like writing? What was the favorite part of the book for you writing?
I enjoyed writing Yassine's perspective, I must say. I liked having somebody who was very religious, being put in this situation. So I guess he was my favorite character. And I liked writing about Zamzam. I liked writing about the mother. Was good fun. And I mean, she's the one closest to me in age. And also Salha and her letters were fun to write at the end as well. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Well, I mean, I love the character of Zamzam. Honestly, I think about her so often as well.
Oh, that's nice.
Really, really, yeah, a really, really brilliant character. And also, like Yasin, it was so interesting because of the fact that he had come in with this knowledge and sort of education, and you could see he was finding it really difficult to then apply that and trying to like follow through with it and do the right thing. But yeah, so he was kind of like almost like a hero, but there was something very gentle about that character, and from the beginning, and I just I
Oh,
can.
that's nice.
There were that he reminded me of a lot of people I have met
Good.
that kind of, that have this like Islamic knowledge, or even from like a different faith, have come and they're sort of so grounded within it, but what they find is the challenge in now applying it to the real world, which is the challenge that we have in faith all the time, is that how do we take our Islamic teaching or our religious teaching and apply it to our situation so that we're always making the right decision. Yeah, I really love that. So who, in terms of writers, who really inspire you?
Okay, well, I was always inspired by the writers who, like me, came to Britain. Writers who've moved into Britain. Abdurazak Gurner, Buchi Macheta, Anita Desai, the many of the writers who kind of like made this movement. So I felt really that this is where I was, continuing with. This was kind of what I was doing, in a way. So they were really my favorite writers. I like Marilyn Robinson. She writes about faith from a Christian point of view. She wrote Gilead and Home, and I like her. I like her writing a lot. It kind of like resonates.
What are some of your hopes for River Spirit?
Do you ask your writers all these questions?
No.
I don't know whether one should hope a lot and then risk disappointment, or you should have humble hopes and then not sure.
Yeah. But I guess more in terms of like, what do you think? What do you hope that readers will take away from the story?
Oh, I haven't thought about that, to be honest. I guess.
I wasn't asking a question about the success of the book. Just to clarify.
See where my mind went. Yeah.
I was like, why is she reacted like that?
I think I would hope they'd learn something about Islam. That's what that they would find some interesting aspect about it that they haven't known before, and interesting history as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you have any advice for maybe any budding authors or someone that's interested in writing?
Tons of advice. I have tons of advice. So read a lot, write about what fascinates you, edit your work after you write it, get a day job, have a good live life. Don't just don't hide away, just really engage with life, and then because that will reflect in what you're reading. I guess that's it for now. Yes.
But I'm really, because obviously you've been writing and having your work published for a long time, and in your experience, how has the publishing industry changed from, I think the 90s, I think your book came out. So, and obviously now we're in 2023. What are your experiences of that change?
Well, I think the climate is more difficult because it's more competitive. More and more people are writing, less and less people are reading. I think a lot of people are watching, TV more. you need to do more, you need to achieve more in order to be successful. If you look at the time in the 90s, the it was considered okay for a book sell X amount of copies. Now this isn't enough. There needs to be more. There needs to be, the writer needs to do more. You need to be on social media. You need to be engaged more with your readers. So it's almost like there's more publicity involved with books, and there's more going on with books. So that's another side that's developed also over the years, that it used to be that the book gets published, the book gets reviewed, writers just appear in one or two festivals. Now there's so many festivals, there's online, all the online stuff wasn't there. So there's a lot going on around the books, and I think that is good. I mean, it's exciting and everything, but I'm wondering if it's taking away time from the reading. Maybe, but I mean, that's how it has changed. It's a lot more competitive nowadays. Yeah. And also the TV is so much better. I mean, in back when I first started out, I remember how poor the television was, and how but nowadays there's a lot more going on these serials and all these shows and things, that it's competing seriously with books.
Yeah, definitely. Well, because I know even as a reader, you only have so many hours a day to read, and sometimes I'm sat there, I'm like, do I watch this Netflix series or do I pick up my book? And then you can start watching a Netflix series, and then it's like 6 hours later, and you're just like, what? Like, what happened? So yeah, I mean, I completely understand that, and I mean, I see a lot of authors on social media, on TikTok, on Instagram, and I can see that's an additional demand that you also don't get paid for as well. So that that's a lot. But how do you think the industry has changed with regard to how warm and welcoming it is to writers of color, to Muslim writers? Have you noticed any change? What was it like then, and what's it like now?
Well, there was always writers writing. There was always African writers writing. There was always Asian writers writing. It's not that they weren't there, but they weren't considered part of the mainstream. Like you wouldn't. They were, sometimes you'd go into bookshops and there'll be shelves called Black authors, and that they would have their own shelf, or then they became known as international authors. Now everybody's all put together in one group. So that has been the change. It's like it's all mainstream now, whereas it used to be there were pockets here and there, and everybody had their fans, and we were reading then in those days, but these authors were not household names as they are now. So back in the day, we would read our own writers, African writers, and we would speak about them, and they would be discussed in universities and all that. But they weren't really in the mainstream. And there were many. There were things like the African writers, the Heinemann African Writers series. There was specialist publishers in a way that used to publish, and things are more mainstream now. The things are more mainstream now, and people are given more chances. But at the end of the day, it's the market rules viciously, and it's whether the book does well or doesn't do well. That's whereas I think in the past, the market wasn't the determining factor. It was one of the things, and people used to be proud in the past that they weren't selling. People used to make fun of airport books. Oh yeah, people would make fun of airport books. They would make fun of writers who sold a lot and say, oh, they can't really be a real writer if they're selling, like. Nowadays it's different. Now it's the other way around. You're a good writer if so many people want your book.
Yeah, of
So
course.
yeah, so that is what has changed so much. It used to be elitist. There was an elitism about literary fiction, which has gone now.
Wow, I had no idea. That's so interesting because now I feel like I always feel so bad for authors whose like debut novel hasn't done as well as they hoped or whatever, because then I feel like now for you to get a second one is going to be so tough. Like it's going to be so tough for you to get that deal and then for you to get the space that you need in the marketing arena. Like I can imagine that's actually very, very
It
tough.
wasn't like that. It wasn't about deals and it wasn't about marketing. It just all these things were just not, and they were actually looked down upon. And but nowadays it's different. Now it's very much the mass readership and
Yeah,
all
you
that.
know, it
Yeah.
does. I mean, it makes sense because I guess it's this idea of, as you said, elitism. Like when we think about newspapers, we think about the newspapers that sell the most tend to be the tabloids, and then we have an
Yeah.
association with what that means. And actually, then you've got like the Guardian and the Independent, which have a lower readership, but they take pride in that because they're like, well, we're the better or the more intellectual or whatever. So I mean, it does make sense. But yeah, I just didn't think that applied
Yeah.
to books.
It
Weirdly,
is.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's really great. But thank you so much for your time today. It has been so lovely talking to you, and I cannot wait for more people to read River Spirit. And I wish you the very best with it, and for anything else that you'll be working on going into the future too. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Samia. All the best to you too. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much to Leila for her time, wisdom, and warmth today. I loved every second of speaking to her and hope you do too. If you enjoyed the podcast, please follow the Diverse Bookshelf on your podcast platform of choice and connect with me on social media. I would really rate it if you could rate and leave a review, as it helps more people find the podcast.